Recap some of the things we remember. I'm going to do this small for the purposes of speed, but that doesn't mean you're supposed to do it small, right? What you should do is do it pretty full page. You don't have to do your tone all the way to the edge of the paper. In fact, you'll probably find it's beneficial in a couple of ways to just have a bit of a border. See if I can get one of these pieces of line. There we go. But I'm going to make a smaller border so that I can speed it up. Right? So you should have, your drawing should be about that size, and you should have a tone of vine all the way across the page. But for the purposes of speed, I'm going to make this smaller. So Andre, when getting a nice even tone on your newsprint, what is the process? How do you do it? How do you get a nice even tone? We had rules, right? I gave a demo. I said, do this, you do that. There's a series of things you do. There's a step, and there's a sequence to it, an order to it. What are they? Okay, what part of your hand are you not allowed to use? Your palm, right? Or?
Your fingers.
Right, well, the tips of your fingers. What part of your hand are you allowed to use?
The side of your
side, right? What side of your right? And when we work it in, right? And I don't say we wipe it down, right? Because if we wipe it down, we wind up wiping away. When we work it in, right? With the side of our hand, right? What is the main reason we work it in?
to get it into the paper.
To get it into the paper, yeah. So we're kind of like pushing it. So you need to use enough pressure. One of these is going to spot right. There we go. That's better. And you want to do this in layers, right? So probably 3 times. And so besides your hand, what other tool should you use for for smoothing out and working in your tone? Paper towel, exactly. Now notice, sometimes you're going to get these little irregularities because any piece of vine charcoal might have little bits of kind of salt in them, right? Because they're made from actual plants. So there might be little crystals, hard bits like salt in there, and they're going to scratch your paper. And don't panic about it. It's nothing to get upset about. Anyone have their paper towel left over from the other day? Oh, fantastic. Now, so the benefit of the paper towel is it will make things smoother. The downside is it's going to take some off, right? It's going to function like a very, very weak eraser. Now, like I said on Friday, right now, everything I've been saying is very technical. It's like specific techniques. It's not so much about the principles of drawing. It's just, this is how you get an even tone with vine on your paper. But remember, the technical issues are not that important. The reason we focus on the technical issues right now is so that it will help you with doing your drawing. So you won't have some of the problems that you might otherwise have. Okay. Notice even though we are focused on tone, I'm still also thinking about making the drawing as correct as possible. So I noticed where I placed this. Once I put this cylinder form, I then noticed that my measurement about how far out that corner was off, so I scaled it in, but then that meant that the box was a little bit too tall. So that meant that I had to shave off some from the bottom. I'm currently examining that my proportion between how much of this plane we see versus how much of that plane we see is a little bit off as well. So remember, no matter what kind of drawing we're doing, we never stop drawing, right? And that means we never stop looking and correcting. We're always saying, is this right? Could it be righter? Okay. Like, I think, unfortunately, in a lot of high school or middle school art classes, not all, but in a lot of them, students learn kind of the bad habit of you do a drawing, and then at a certain point, you stop the line drawing, and then you just start, let's say, shading, right? You're working with value. And then it's assumed at that point that your drawing part is done, right? That the line drawing is done. And what that basically means is you've stopped looking, right? And when you stop looking, from my definition, you stop drawing, right? The minute you stopped really asking yourself the question of, is this right? Is this really here? Is that angle correct? Then you've stopped drawing. And now you're just decorating. I say just decorating. Decorating can be a wonderful thing. I can spend a lot of time in my sketchbook sometimes decorating a sketch to get it to a place where I feel like it communicates to someone else everything that I saw in that moment. But I never forget the fact that it's not the same thing as actually in the moment looking, right? So, and in this class, we put a value on actual in the moment looking. Okay, so I've drawn some of my objects a little bit outside my view just so that I have like a sense of where they are, but all the value work is going to go on in here. Okay, so a 3-value drawing, if you remember, right? What we next do is we next decide, okay, this is what are going to be my darks? So that's a dark. That's going to be a dark. And as I put this down in Vine, it doesn't matter really all that much about how even or whatever, because I know I'm going to be going over it and making it a more consistent dark when I come in with my black Conte. Okay, that's going to be a dark. What's going to be a light? That's going to be a light. All of that's going to be a light. What's going to be a mid-value? Well, a lot of this space behind the top of this box here, that's going to be a mid-value. Right. So I'm just kind of like thinking, what's light, what's dark, what's mid-value? And so in a 3-value drawing, those are your 3 choices, right? Everything is either a light, a dark, or a mid-value. As you can see from the ones that other people have done, those are 2 of Michelle's right over there. So does anyone have an eraser?
Yep.
Excellent. So, as I said in class on Friday, at this point you want to have both your kneaded eraser and your white plastic eraser. And let's talk for a second about the difference between a kneaded eraser and a white plastic eraser. Notice right now that as I'm erasing, because this plane is going to be a light and that plane is light, there is no line there, right? The line goes away. Does that make sense? So I'm going to put in my light. Anyway, the difference between your kneaded eraser in some ways is kind of like a sports car, right? It's got like all these gears, right? You've got first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Is there anything like any cars have more than a 5th gear? I don't know. Maybe 6th gear, right? Because and actually a kneaded eraser is even better than that, because like most erasers are like a computer. They're completely binary, right? It's purely just an on and off switch. You either erase and you erase pretty much as you can with that eraser, or you go over an area and you don't erase. right? Then you're like, oh, I got to press harder. And then you erase, right? It's one or the other. A kneaded eraser allows you to erase a little bit more, a little bit more. So your kneaded eraser is a very useful tool for this. But your white plastic eraser is useful because there will be times where you want to get back to as light as possible on the page. And you will find that your kneaded eraser will just not quite get light enough. And that's what you need your white plastic eraser for. So we're looking at this right now as a three-value drawing. Okay, and I'm just going to concentrate on this setup right here. And I'm not even going to do all of the top because it gets complicated and we don't have time for that. Okay, now if you were doing a three-value drawing, the next thing you would do is this area here, I'm just going to kind of like lightly put X's on it, right? So like this area right here, right? And that shape right there, and this shape all right there, into this shape all right there. I would say all of that is going to go to either pure black or a very, very dark that you get with your, I'll put one in, right? So if all of them go to the same dark, that means then there will be no line there either, right? Just like there's no line here, there will be no line there because this is a dark and that's a dark. And with your black Conte, we're talking about a dark potentially that dark, right? Okay. But now for a five-value drawing, we have choices. So we're not going to go all the way that dark right away. First thing we're going to do is we're going to erase our lights. We're going to have a light, a mid, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a mid-dark. We're just going to make all of our darks mid-dark. So that means instead of bringing our black Conte and going full, we're going to bring our black Conte and just go like kind of a half tone. And then we're going to bring our vine over the top of it. And here's another technical thing that we're going to be learning from this process, right? The interaction between vine charcoal and your black Conte is really kind of, it's almost magical. There's something really awesome about it. Because when you put a tone of vine down, right, and then you put black Conte over the top, it's a lot easier to erase black Conte. Like one of the things about black Conte is you put a heavy mark with black Conte, it's almost impossible. Whatever kind of eraser you have, you could have like the hardest of those really hard white plastic eraser pencils, which are like about as powerful an eraser you can get, and you still won't be able to lift most of that black mark off the page, right? Black Conte sticks to the paper because it's wax-based, primarily. And so if you put a tone of vine down, though, all of a sudden now your black Conte is more erasable. But at the same time, if you put a tone of vine down and then a tone of black Conte down and then more vine, you'll find that you can get more of your vine charcoal onto the page. Because the vine contains wax and that becomes the binder, right? Whereas this doesn't have anything. So like your vine charcoal has a limit of just how dark it can get on the page. But when it's layered over the top of your black Conte, all of a sudden you can get much more layers. So much darker. Okay, so we're doing, what are we saying? We're doing kind of a mid-tone dark for all of our darks. Go to there. So in this one demo, I'm kind of doing both. I talked about the 3-value, and now I'm talking about the 5-value. Okay. And we can already see the benefit of having more values to work with, because now we can make a distinction between this and that, right? Make sure to work stuff into the page. Make sure not to use the tip of your finger. You notice how like a little bit of the tip of my finger got right there? And it kind of lifted up. Fortunately, it did not leave a too permanent a mark. But okay. And everywhere that we have this value, we want it to be the same. Just like everywhere that is the mid value, we want it to be the same. Now I also see a little bit of a cast shadow from the Visine bottle right there. That's going to go that way. And there's also a little bit of a reflection right there that I'm going to just also make a little bit darker. Okay, and now we can go to our next darkest value. We could say, in this case, we could say that this is our darkest value, and this would be the same as other places over here and like down here at the bottom of this form, right? There are a few other places that would be as dark as that. Down there, the cast shadow from the spray bottle, and then up over here. The interior, technically the interior of that cylinder, the tall cylinder, would actually be way darker than all these other values. But we can say that they're all the same for the purposes of our drawing. And then we could say that we have an in-between value. So we have 1, 2, 3, and that's 5. Now we need a 4 that's in between. That's great to have on a video for YouTube. That's my stomach growling. I did have breakfast, I promise. And remember, as you're making these different, your mid-dark and your next mid-dark, right? Always come back over with your vine. That'll help to even out that tone. Does anyone have a kneaded eraser? Because I'm going to need a kneaded eraser. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so here we have value 1, right? Value 2, which is also the same value there, same value there. Then we have value 3, which is here and here. Notice how value 3 functions as our reflective light, right? Okay, and I really want value 3 to be up here as well, but I'd already gotten a little bit too dark. I remember what I said about how a kneaded eraser is kind of like a race car. It's got multiple gears. We can use it to just erase a little tiny bit. Okay, so now that's the same value. So we have value, this is value 2, that's value 3, right? And then this is value 4, right? And notice the value 4 is not as dark. I'm gonna go ahead and smooth this one out just a little bit more, as value 5. So we have 5 values. Does that make sense? So for those of you who haven't done this yet, right? Does everyone see how they can do a 3-value drawing, right? Tone over the whole page, right? Like draw a border first and then tone all the way up to the border. And if there's a little bit of smear beyond the border, that's fine. Tone over the whole page. And then you draw in Vine, you organize your objects. Remember, I got one. Remember, don't stop drawing. And then, right, for a 3 value, you then erase all your lightest lights, right? You erase your lightest lights. You then, and like our lightest lights would be over here as well. I just haven't gotten to it yet. And remember, when you're erasing your lightest lights, that you want to make a distinction of, like, anytime you say this is a value and this is the same value, that unless you actually see like an actual cast shadow that represents that line right there, and you could make the case that you see a little bit of a trace line right there, but otherwise you just say there is no boundary whatsoever and it just bleeds right in, right? And that's fine because our brain can fill in the rest. Okay, so and then you come in and you just do a dark like that for everything else that's not a mid or a light. That's a 3 value. But for a 5 value, you come in and you make a very, very light dark, right? Like a value that's just a little bit darker than our mid that's already there, right? And that's the first dark value that you put down. And you put that everywhere that there might be any kind of dark that's a little bit darker than your mid. And then you make distinctions. Now, we can also have, you could also find more values. We're going to go to a 6th value, and I'll show you how, just for a second. What if we made, where did I put the paper? Where did I put the paper towel? Ah, thank you. What if we made a tone that was just a little bit darker than the tone of the paper? We could then say we could have an edge right there, because see how there's like a little bit, just this very faint kind of shadow that's going on right over here on the table, and how that helps us see that being a little bit lighter than that. And it also would allow us to do something like this. We come in with our white plastic eraser and we put that glare highlight and show that that's even brighter than the overall light on the form, right? Now, this is pretty subtle right now because I made that value, it's very, very, very pale. Right? I can make it darker. Let's say we say that you can say that all of our second lights are this value. And then we come in and erase back to our lightest light again. And so, of course, I could have done my 5 value where that was, right? So it was like, I did not make a distinction here, or rather, I didn't make this different than that. I just made all of these that same value, right? And then I could have had 1, right? 1, then 2, 3, and then 4, and then 5, this would be the same as that, okay? Right now, technically, it's a 6th value drawing because this value is different from that value. Does that make sense? Andre, does that make sense? Okay. All right. And so you could then use that same principle. You added just one more value, like let's say a value, you made a value even darker than this, right? That would then go into places like the absolute dark right there, and also the absolute dark that we see on that cylinder at the top of the cylinder over there. We could then have a 7 value drawing right there. Okay, that makes sense? All right, so some of the important principles are, though, you keep each decision about value, right? You keep each decision about value distinct. So no blending, right? No trying to soften the edges, right? It's either one value or the other, okay? And you have to decide. You have to look and decide. Should this be a mid value, right? Should this be a mid value? Or or should this be darker than my mid value? And you keep, and if it is darker, right, then it becomes a question of two things. How much darker is this than that? And how much darker should I make it? If I had to err on the side of this being a little bit darker or err on the side of this being the same as that, which would be better? And the answer I would say is, it would be better if this is a little bit darker because it would just makes the light move a lot more.
So there's no blended.
There's no blended. Never. No capes either. All right. Are we good? All right, let's do it.